Welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. Your chance to learn about the teachings of the Catholic Church on sacred music, both in theory and practice. Through interviews, discussions, and music, your hearts and minds will be lifted up and better understand what it means to sing the praise of His glory. And now, your host, Dr. Jennifer Donaldson-Nowicka.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast, the official podcast of the Catholic Institute of Sacred Music. Navigating one's health when one has a lot of responsibilities at home and at church, and when one is oriented towards service and helping others, as so many church musicians are, it can become easy to neglect one's health. But especially for musicians who need their bodies to make the beauty of God incarnate and sound, this neglect is not without effect, not only on one's own health and ability to be there for the people who rely on us, but also on the quality of sound and work we produce for the glory of God and sanctification of the faithful. For that reason, I was grateful that Dr. Lizbeth Mendoza, a board-certified physician in family medicine and in functional anti-aging and regenerative medicine located in Miami, agreed to join me for an interview about some basics that those who are tight on time and money and who need their bodies for work might consider in caring for their health. This interview was a follow-up from a session Dr. Alter gave graduate students from the Catholic Institute of Sacred Music in the spring 2026 term during a continuing education program. If you're interested in applying to our graduate program for entrance in summer 2027, applications will open in October of 2026 for the 36-credit Master of Sacred Music degree program, the 20-credit post-baccalaureate certificates in Gregorian chant and sacred choral music, and for students applying just to take a class or few as a non-degree seeking student. Summer 2027 promises to be a full one with nearly 20 different courses offered. If you're interested in staying up to date on when applications open, sign up for our mailing list on the pop-up on our website, catholicinstituteofsacredmusic.org. And now, on to the interview. Liz, it's been great to reconnect with you recently, and you were with us for a continuing education panel for our graduate students, and you had so many great things to say. I thought, this has to be a podcast episode, so thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jenny, for having me.
So I'm wondering if you could start by saying, and of course we're talking about it in a generalized sort of context, and anyone should be checking with their own doctor here, but what are some of the most common and preventable health problems you see as a doctor amongst people who are stressed out and busy, as many church musicians are?
Sure. And yes, and always the reminder that what I'll be discussing is just general medical information. And it's always important to get checked by a primary care doctor in your area in person if you can. But in general, what I see with stressed patients, and it's something that I lovingly call them the three amigos, but it's usually high blood pressure, pre-diabetes or high fasting sugar, glucose, and high cholesterol. Those are the three things that start creeping up, usually in labs before the patient is formally diagnosed with any diagnosis. And they're all related to lack of sleep, lack of exercise, not drinking enough water, not eating well, too many processed foods. And a lot of times patients don't even realize this is happening. Usually the ones that do have symptoms, they always think it's their thyroid, which I think we're going to touch upon later. But usually what I start seeing in patients, whether it's that they came in and we did their vitals and that blood pressure is somewhat elevated, or they went to some other event and they had their blood pressure checked, whether it was an eye doctor, dentist, something, and they come in with these elevated readings. And usually that's a sign of stress. So especially the blood pressure, it's analogous to that gauge on your car, right? So your car has all these lights and gauges, and when you see one, it doesn't necessarily mean the car is going to stall right away, but it's letting you know, look, you better check into this. I need oil, I need water. whatever it is. And same thing with your body. So that's why I suggest to patients at least every other year or every year to have your basic bloods done. And usually part of that is getting your vitals done. And again, usually it, I always remind patients that these three are usually reversible, even if you have a family history of it, because I always remind patients that a family history doesn't condemn you to the medical issue. It just predisposes. 20% is genetics, 80% is lifestyle modification,
Yeah.
and sleep, exercise, water consumption, eating better.
Wow, that's great. So anyone can go to their PCP and get this sort of things done. But have you had any experience with specialized testing services? For example, I think of the new product on the market, Function Health, does a much broader panel of blood work than a regular PCP would do.
Right. And my only concern with that is that, some patients may not have the financial means uh, for more elaborate panels. So entry level, you minimally want to have that primary care basic blood test, because you're right, they don't do any in-depth evaluation. So you're lucky if they check an extra hemoglobin A1C, which tells you how pre-diabetic you may be, or a TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone, as a screening for thyroid. But if you do have access to the more in-depth panels, of course, I tend in my own practice to not overwhelm the patient too much. I find if I do too many things, so namely blood tests, saliva tests, stool tests, they just freak out and get overwhelmed with me or with what I'm saying. So I always like to start with the blood test, and I do about 15 to 16 panels, touching the basics, but also those inflammatory markers like homocysteine, HSCRP, ferritin levels, which are not done in conventional medicine until there's a problem. And of course, the full thyroid panel, B12, D levels. But actually, I even saw a service where you don't even have to go to a facility. They send you a gadget, you put it on your arm, and then you send in the blood, which I thought was fascinating. It didn't have the price, but it was 2 pages of tests. The only issue with that is if you don't have a relationship with that doctor or a rapport, I'm not sure what the logistics are with it afterwards, right? So who's meeting with you to review that? Sometimes I'll have patients that said, oh, I got this deal online and I did these, but I don't know what they mean. And so, I review them with them, but sometimes some of these services leave you hanging afterwards,
Yeah.
or they want to sell you on a certain program, which is fine as long as you're comfortable with the program.
Yeah, as someone currently located in Silicon Valley, it kind of reminds of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos a little bit. I hope it's not the same sort of setup with that. Um, yeah, so thank you for the reminder about how to do that at a low cost. And that is obviously an issue for a lot of church musicians, that we don't have a lot of access to things because we're living on modest incomes. And so I'm wondering if you could describe what are some of the easiest choices people who are busy and don't have a lot of money can do to eat healthier. For example, at the office until really late, and then the only thing open on the way home is not even like a healthy grocery store or something, but it's just a burger joint. But what are some of the easiest things that we can do?
I always tell busy people and people that may not have resources to maybe go to a high-end organic market on a regular basis, to minimally avoid eating out. I find when patients eat out more, even the low quality places, it's much more expensive than making food at home. And now there are plentiful gadgets, right? So there's Instapot, there's air fryers, there's these all-in-one kind of devices or appliances that patients can use. But really, the goal is prepping. So I always tell patients to have that day of preparation. It doesn't have to be a full day. It could be just, 2, 3 hours one afternoon. In my household, that's, Sunday. So, that's when we do the bulk of the cooking. I know some patients don't like leftovers. And I've even had some patients that tell me I eat out because I need it fresh. I don't like leftover food. But something's got to give, right? So if you can't make, fresh meals daily, you should have maybe some protein that you've either pre-made and, you can freeze and then just heat up, or just sides of healthy carbs. But I find that when patients make bad choices is when they don't have something ready.
Mhm.
Now, in terms of going out and stopping by a place, now I find that more fast food places, not the really low end ones, but the medium level ones are, you hear things such as, free range this, or, there's some cues that tell you that the place has somewhat of a conscience of what they're serving you. So whether it's free range, no antibiotics, locally resourced, those cues, I tell patients if you're going to have a place to pick up your food that night that you can't have anything at home, then just have one place that you've researched that's on your way that you feel like, okay, this is not great, but it's better than the soy or partially hydrogenated high fructose
Yeah.
stuff I may be getting. And then the last point on that is, again, I just want to stress the preparation, because that's where you avoid these bad choices. And no, my last point, having a good protein shake at home. I know some patients like to actually masticate their food, and they don't like drinking a shake. But I find shakes an easy thing to do if you come home, let's say after 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and you're not in the mood for a meal and you don't want to pick up something unhealthy. If you have water, a good rice milk or good almond milk, and you have a good protein shake, a scoop or two, and you've got yourself a nutritious meal to hold you over till the next day.
Can I ask you two follow-ups on that? What are some healthy protein shakes that you've seen? Because every time I look at those things, they seem to have a lot of junk in them and sugar. And the second question is, you mentioned healthy carbs. What are some examples of healthy carbs? And is sourdough included in that? I've been seeing a lot of stuff about sourdough recently.
The first rule, I know we're going to talk about supplements later, but the truth is, you do want to spend good money on supplements. The cheaper the supplement, whether it's buy one, get one free at a local pharmacy or a local supermarket, that's where you're getting into a dangerous area, unless what I call bringing your magnifying glass and really reading that label. So some of the things you want to look for in a healthy protein shake are rice and pea protein sources. Definitely, if it's soy or if it doesn't even explain the protein source, I try to stay away from it. Unfortunately, even the good ones have a long ingredient list, so but they should have nutrition facts on it, meaning they're stating what nutrients are in there. And obviously the ingredients, if you see sugar cane, I don't know. Most of the good ones are either sweetened with monk fruit, or I'm not a big fan of stevia, but stevia is, somewhat healthier. So those are some things to look out for. But yeah, it's really an ocean of protein shakes out there. So I have two in my office for patients, so they don't have to do the work. And I sometimes tell them, look, invest in this one, and then you can always keep the tub and then compare labels with it. And that way you get some idea of what's healthy or not out there. And the second part of the question?
Healthy carbs.
Right. Okay. So what I mean by that, usually veggies, to me, vegetables and greens are a given. So I don't want to dismiss that. But remember, you want to have that protein, because from previous discussions that we've had, Dr. Jenny, I know that there was some controversy over intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
And That's why I stress protein all the time, because I do believe in intermittent fasting, which means just having less meals and a more narrow eating window during the day, but always starting with protein, because protein, number one, you need the raw material for your muscle, and the amino acids are the building blocks of your cells and so on. But also satiety. So this is my struggle with my vegetarian patients, that regardless, you need to, you need satiety, which is that feeling of satisfaction after a meal. And when you're a vegetarian, just as an example, you're going to fill up with carbs, because it doesn't matter how much edamame or tofu you put in there, it just doesn't give you that satiety the way protein does. And so I don't want to negate the veggies, the greens, which you can have in abundance, and which do provide some starch and can fill in for the carb category, the good carbohydrate categories, such as, carrots and, those other starchy vegetables. But some of my favorites are jasmine rice, basmati rice, sweet potato. And I tell patients, even pasta, if you have semolina pasta, it's usually healthier. And again, these are small portions of these. But since we were talking about meal prepping, so I always like to have some protein in the fridge and a carb, either frozen or refrigerated, just to heat up for those weekly night meals, evening meals. And the veggies, can be frozen. I know people cringe at canned, but now there's more responsible canning. So you have the non-BPA linings and things like this. Again, not the best, but if you're busy and you don't have time to go to the supermarket and get fresh things, those are always some options.
Is it a good rule, do you think? I mean, we hear a lot, like if you look at the color amount on your plate and you have a variety of colors that fit together, is that generally a good rule?
Yes. Yeah. Those colors pertain to certain phytonutrients. So the more variety there is in that, that is true. And different forms of cooking. So it's good for you to have, just as an example, for carrots. So some days you can have them raw, some days lightly steamed, some days boiled. So you don't have to, you get different extractions of nutrients depending, or the other one's stir frying your veggies. So I like doing that with asparagus. So I'll just chop up the asparagus, throw in some avocado oil or coconut oil, salt, and just stir fry it. You're not limited to one way of preparation in terms of these food items.
And that relates a little bit to my question about sourdough. Is the fermentation process really helpful in addressing concerns that people have about wheat and problems with the things that are being sprayed on wheat and the kind of brands of wheat? What's your thought on that?
Right. So it's interesting because gluten it has been so villainized, and the average human is not supposed to consume the amount of gluten that we do. So one of the issues in the initial villainization of gluten was, or just wheat products in general, was defining that it was really the glyphosate or the pesticides being sprayed on these crops that was more of a culprit than the actual nutrient or the wheat product. So in terms of sourdough, though, you're having, I believe it's only a third gluten. So it is the better choice. But the problem that I've had with my patients with sourdough is that they just take that to another level, and then they're having sourdough
All the time.
and I remind them, wait a minute, let's back up here.
Yeah.
Out of the carbs, bread is the worst. So then comes pasta, then rice, and the thing is portion control. I don't believe in zero carbs ever, but getting back to the sourdough, so you can have it. My experience with sourdough has varied so much from product to product. So I find the harder the bread is, the more it's truly sourdough. Like in my household, we'll have it Wednesdays and Sundays. That's our days for bread. Otherwise, we avoid it. So it's not licensed to have it all the time, even though it is the healthier option. Now, if you're getting used to eating healthier and you want to use, let's say you're a bread person, you've been eating bread or pasta all the time, and you want to transition with sourdough, yet, it's a good way of doing it, but just knowing that eventually you can't have it as much. And really, just the last point on the carbs in general, we forget fruit. Fruit, it is nature's Jolly Ranchers, but they are rich in fiber, phytonutrients, vitamins. So they should be a part of our carb category as well.
Mm-hmm. So let's move now to talking about supplements. And so someone's saying, well, you're saying things about how to eat healthfully. If I'm eating healthfully, doesn't that mean that I'm getting everything that I need? Why would I need supplements if I'm doing my job in the other area?
Right. So, when I first embarked in functional medicine, we were giving a book known as Vitamins Hyper Hope. And it's a very, basic book on vitamins. But one of the paragraphs that I highlighted early on it's a quote from the Journal of the American Medical Association. And it states suboptimal vitamin states are associated with many chronic diseases, including heart, cancer, and osteoporosis. It is important for physicians to identify patients with poor nutrition or other reasons for increased vitamin needs, end quote. And they suggest, quote, most people do not consume an optimal amount of all vitamins by diet alone. It appears prudent for all adults to take vitamin supplements, unquote. So I recommend vitamin C quite frequently. And I'll have patients that immediately so enthusiastically tell me, well, I drink orange juice every day. And then my comeback with that is, well, it takes 16 oranges to get 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. So yes, you are getting the nutrient, but not the right quantity. But aside from that, I think in the turn of the last century, right? So late 1800s, early 1900s, we had that more farm to table lifestyle. Whereas, as soon as in the late 40s, early 50s, don't quote me on that, but I know it was around that time period. As soon as partially hydrogenated oil got introduced, high fructose corn syrup, our nutrients just weren't there as much because now there was all these fillers and processed foods and whatnot. And then as we've treated the soil more, those nutrients have been depleted. But it's hard to articulate the necessity of nutrients because just magnesium alone, it takes 200 processes in your body. The 200 processes in your body require magnesium. So even if you ate well, you're still not getting enough because, of course, we're under a lot of wear and tear, right? So our systems weren't made for this amount of cortisol and adrenaline that we're under. So we're always in fight or flight. We're always on the go, things to do, a lot of stress. So that's a further source of depletion as well.
Yeah. Can you list the basic supplements most people should be taking?
I see a lot of young adults that tell me, Doc, I don't want so many pills. They're always complaining about the pills. And so the first one that comes to mind, I'm going to kind of throw at the end of the list, which is the multivitamin. So, and actually, a recent article came out on their importance recently. So it goes back and forth. But if I have someone who's a real minimalist in terms of whether they have swallow issues, they just forget things. I like the multivitamin because at least I know they're getting a little bit of everything in there. But if I could put the multi at the end of the list, I would say a B complex.
And that has B2, B3, B6, B12?
Well, yes. A B complex usually has those, and depending, they'll have stragglers of different heavy hitters. So for instance, the one I have in the office has an extra B in there that's good for neuropathy. So, I have a lot of patients with these effects from either diabetes or chemotherapy. So I've had good success with that one. So it's something that, but yeah, usually there's a basic list of Bs, and then they'll have extra things in there. So there may be a B complex for hair that has extra biotin in it, which biotin is a member of the B vitamin family that fortifies your hair, things like that. But a B complex, because B12 namely is the workhorse of your cells. So B12 has to be abundant in your system in order for your mood to be good, for you to have energy, things like this, for your cells to remove waste, things like that. But I don't like B12 by itself though too much, because it can throw off the other B. So that's why I'm mentioning the B complex. And then vitamin C is important, and D3, but making sure it has K2 in it. So it's usually a K2 D3.
And what
Uh,
are good dosages for those for C and
um,
D?
so for C, I like at least anywhere between 700 to 1,000 milligrams. In terms of musicians, performers, whether you're comfortable performing or not, it is a stressor, right? So you're going to be performing, so there's going to be these triggers in your body and a cascade of events. So the more vitamin C on board, the more you have the raw material for your cortisol, which is your fight or flight hormone. So if I have patients that whatever their stress is, or if they're going to travel on a plane, if they're a lawyer and they're going to have their trial lawyers, and they have to do a lot of speaking, a lot of performing, I tell them to do 1,000 3 times daily. Or if they're ill, there's a lot of circumstances for more C, but minimally 1,000 daily.
And that should be taken with a good amount of water, right? Like if we're trying to get it through our system.
Right. Well, hydration, is necessary for so many things, right? But yes, do you want to drink plenty of water, and also movement? I forget where I read recently that, let's say you're really into supplements, and you have a handful of supplements and you take them. If you're not moving around, you're not really circulating those nutrients. So yes, you need the water, right, to help your circulation, because your blood flow relies on water, but also the movement. So it's important to move throughout the day to then circulate those nutrients as well.
Yeah. And so how much for vitamin D?
Yes. So vitamin D, D3 should be 5,000 IUs. There's a lot of them out there. There are 2,000 IUs. I mean, again, these are general terms. It's always good to have your levels checked. But many doctors, conventional doctors, won't do D3 levels, but I always like to check levels. And honestly, I've had sometimes patients, when I do their B12 is adequate. So then I think, well, let's recheck again in 3 months, make sure it stays that way, and maybe not give them a B complex if I can maybe add something different or do something different. So checking your levels are important, and B12 and D are the easiest levels to obtain in blood work. But in general, I like 5,000 IUs, because I find the 2,000 IU is not high enough.
Great. Yeah. And then so we've got B complex, C, D, what else?
Omega 3s. So omega 3s are fatty acids. There's two of them, EPA, DHA. So if any lady here has been pregnant, the prenatal will have mostly DHA, because one helps the brain and then the other, EPA, helps the heart. So when a woman is pregnant, she needs more of the DHA, because the baby's neurosystem is being formed, namely the brain. So the prenatal is usually rich in DHA, not to be confused with DHEA, but those are the two omega-3 fatty acids. And so I usually like a 50-50 blend, and something that provides 1,000 milligrams of them in total. sometimes that 1,000 milligrams is two soft gels. Sometimes it's one, depending on the product. And yeah, and then at night, the magnesium. I tell them B, C, D, omega. I'm sorry, I forgot probiotics. Yeah, probiotics are important, and then the magnesium at night.
Mm-hmm. Is there a way, for example, I like using magnesium lotion because it avoids upsetting my stomach. That sometimes happens with magnesium. Have you had success or experience with different kinds of applications of magnesium or any of these other vitamins?
Sure. Yeah. So one of my favorite things to advise patients, if they're very high strung at night, is and they have a bathtub, is Epsom salt baths. So that's another way of getting Epsom salt. Or Epsom salt is rich in magnesium. So any vehicle that you can put on your skin that provides it, yeah. I mean, I haven't personally used magnesium in a lotion, but yeah, I mean, I think the skin is definitely a vehicle to get in certain nutrients, of course, and that's where. So the D, the Bs, sometimes they're available in liquid and sublingually and things like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what are some of the basic things that people should look for when they're buying supplements? Because not everything is equal. I think of vitamin C, for example. So much of it is just manufactured ascorbic acid, which presumably maybe provides some benefit, but there are other kinds of vitamin C's, for example, that are naturally derived and then have all the other phytonutrients coming from those vitamins. But what's your thought on that?
Yeah. Well, in general, the first thing that comes to mind that's the easiest is whether it's a multivitamin or a B complex. When you look at the B12 content, if it says cyanocobalamin versus methylcobalamin, it's definitely a cheaper product. So cyanocobalamin needs to be broken down by your body into methylcobalamin for better absorption. So, but it's much cheaper as a raw product to get cyanocobalamin. I mean, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to toss it if you have a product in your home, in your cupboard, that has the cyano, but just know that it's a lower quality. So that's one example. And in terms of anything that you get at a pharmacy or a supermarket, it's just going to be somewhat lower end. I always tell patients to either go to a health food store, or now it's very common for health clinics or offices, doctors to carry supplements, because those are more medical grade. There's certain companies that have high quality ingredients that would only cater to other health professionals in terms of distributing their product. But I also, in terms of being economical, so what I tell patients is there's certain things that you do want to have as high quality to get a bigger effect. So let's say someone's having joint pain and they've heard turmeric is good for that. Well, if you want to get your B and C, D more economically, I would then spend more money on the better turmeric to then have a decrease in your inflammation, since your pain is the issue. So you can kind of mix and match things according to your greatest need at the moment. So let's say I have someone who just left the hospital with a heart bypass. They had arteries blocked, and now they had the surgery and they're on all these medications. Well, you want a high quality fish oil, omega-3. You want a high quality CoQ10. So there's certain circumstances or conditions where you may want that higher quality product, and then maybe just get the other ones at an average place where it's more economical, but you're still getting the quality.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about, a lot of us work with children, or, as I sometimes describe my job is actually to have people breathe on me and sound beautiful while doing it, so, we're constantly dealing with trying to keep our immune systems up. So what are some of the things that we can do to make sure that we are staying healthy?
Yeah, as a family doctor, I deal with many families, and always, whether it's grandparents or parents, well, the kids brought this from daycare, or, the kids came over for the weekend and I caught what they had. And, there's only so much barrier method that can be done. So, I mean, even going back to COVID time, it was shown that the mask would only do so much, right? So, there's no way to really stop the germs from coming at you. So this is where that healthy immune system plays a big role. Now, patients' immune systems vary from person to person. I've had patients that, never get sick, and then I have patients that, for whatever reason, are getting sick on a weekly basis. And I think the reliance has to be on your immune system, because no matter how many times you wash your hands, no matter how many times you redirect the child or young adult to cough in their elbow, or cover their mouth for whatever reason, it's still in the air. So that's where, again, if someone wants to be economical about it, vitamin C, vitamin D, and probiotics definitely have to be in your regimen apart from your multivitamin. And you can also consider the months that are obviously the flu season. So, I always tell patients, beginning in October, you need to start this. If you want to take a break during the summer and be more lax about it, but between October and really May, you need to have those three minimally on board. And you don't have to necessarily take them every day, but at least Monday through Friday. Let's say your practice time is a certain day or a couple days. You need to have this on board prior. And then there are some nutrients that provide additional layers of protection. So, a popular one is echinacea, elderberry. My favorites are the mushrooms, so the shiitake, the maitake, the cordyceps, turkey tail. I have my favorite products of those, and also things like andrographis, which is an herb that helps you fight viruses. So these are other layers to your protection. And also, so let's say you're not doing much, and that Junior coughed in your face, and Junior did not look well, but you feel fine. So that evening, or as soon as you can, you start taking these extra nutrients. So if you're a person that doesn't like taking things on a daily basis, as soon as you have the exposure, I usually have some supplements in my purse. So as soon as something happens that I think I might have gotten exposed, I start taking it as soon as possible. Because again, you want to support that immune system to fight whatever came at you.
Yeah.
So, being prepared that way.
Have you had any experience with things that are like a hydrogen peroxide rinse for the nose, or like a nose spray, or something to gargle with to, again, just decrease the viral load in those orifices so that your immune system can better deal with it?
Oh, yes. So right now we're in high pollen season, and you have patients that are just miserable with their itchy eyes, runny nose, and they're just taking all these antihistamines and feeling groggy, having side effects. And whether it's the scenario that musicians are in, or patients with who are highly reactive to pollen, irrigation is a great idea. I'm not a big fan of hydrogen peroxide, though. I find hydrogen peroxide highly abrasive, highly caustic, especially to those sensitive tissues in the pharynx and whatnot. So, what I like is a saline nasal spray for the nasal passages. And I tell patients a regimen of before and after. So, that let's say you're going to practice, or you're going to be teaching or whatnot, then you can do an irrigation prior and an irrigation afterwards. So, of your nose with the saline nasal spray, those are available over the counter. Of course, there are higher levels of that as well, such as the neti pot. Now they have just these lavage systems that are really elaborate. So it depends on how comfortable the patient is with innervating their nose, so to speak. And then in terms of your pharynx, or the back of your throat, Yeah, gargles with warm water and salt are great. And I prefer sea salt to table salt. So I always tell patients, again, if you've had an exposure, you do the gargle 3 times back to back with an ounce of water and being very generous with that sea salt. But if you don't have sea salt, you can use table salt. It's okay. And then half an hour, 40-minute break, repeating things like that. So a few times of that may save you from having caught whatever might have been in the atmosphere.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit to thyroid issues. And you brought it up earlier in an interview, but what are some of the signs of thyroid issues and what should people do to get them figured out?
A lot of patients attribute these confounding symptoms to the thyroid. So, yeah, what are some of the basic symptoms of thyroid? People who feel cold, whether it's cold feet, cold hands, gaining weight, feeling tired, sleep disturbance, menstrual disturbance, lack of energy. I'm a big believer that it's more of an adrenal problem. So the reason why so much attention is focused on the thyroid is because the thyroid is so easy to test in blood work. So whereas the other members of the hormonal symphony are not as easy to test as the thyroid is. And we have a medication for the thyroid. So that's where all this attention gravitates towards the thyroid, which I'm not opposed to. I think it's important to look at the thyroid, but I think it's a mistake to run to treat it, to be so hasty in medicating patients. Because how I explain the thyroid to patients, it's the tattletailer of the family. So, we all had that person in our family that would tell the parents, oh, they did this, they did that. That's what your thyroid is supposed to do. It's when the thyroid is either giving you symptoms or if there's something wrong in your lab work, it's usually related to your gut health, to toxins that you're accumulating in your liver and in your body in general, or other hormones are imbalanced that need to be adjusted. So my approach to thyroid is always, okay, yes, tell me all your symptoms, but let's look at, and the problem is in conventional medicine, so speaking of those more elaborate panels previously, is that most conventional doctors will only do a TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. And this chemical, if you will, or lab test comes from your brain. It doesn't even come from your thyroid. So we're making treatment decisions based on something the brain is communicating. So there's a lot of issues with the thyroid, but my overall advice is, let's say you go to your conventional doctor, you get your TSH and your TSH is elevated. And I think we're kind of gravitating towards hypothyroidism, right? So, in thyroid world, there's hyperthyroid and then there's hypothyroid. But the majority of medical issues with the thyroid are related to hypothyroidism, meaning your thyroid isn't producing that thyroid hormone as much. And it's usually most of the time caused by something known as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune issue against your thyroid, which they tell you it can't be reversed. I've seen it reversed with a lot of work and effort from the part of the patient. But yes, I think that those are the signs. And my advice is, yes, you can see your conventional doctor for it, but do your research, try to see someone functional once they tell you, hey, you need medicine, things like this. Hyperthyroidism, though, it's a different story because hyperthyroidism can be life-threatening in terms that it can provoke an arrhythmia or an abnormal heart rhythm known as atrial fibrillation. So there you do have to pay attention to the conventional doctors. I think with hypothyroidism, you have time if you're told you have that. And my last point is that let's say you do suspect thyroid issues and the test comes back, oh, you're fine. Well, your thyroid might be fine on paper, but it may still need support. Mm-hmm. So don't dismiss the possibility of thyroid issues, even if your thyroid test was normal.
Yeah. One last category of health issues, and that is hormonal imbalances and problems. What, for example, can women who are aging do to make sure they keep their voices in shape as they go through hormonal changes?
Right. And, it's interesting because I had to look into this a little bit because in my years of training in functional medicine, for women and men's voices change too, and men have obviously this changes as well. But the focus is always on everything else because nobody talks about voice changes or voice issues. And it's funny because I did have a conversation recently with this other musician friend of mine, and he's had about a 40-year career singing and whatnot. And we were discussing a contemporary singer who had some songs, that were hits back in the 80s. And I had recently heard this person singing them now. And I thought, it sounds so different. It just the pitch. I mean, I'm not good with musical terms, but it just didn't sound the same. And we started talking about that. And, I asked, this musician friend of mine, well, how do you keep your voice? And, they mentioned no smoking, alcohol is an astringent and it burns your vocal cords. But beyond that, the hormonal changes are real. So one of the things that falling estrogen levels can do is they can thin, dry, and reduce the lubrication of the mucosal covering, muscle atrophy. So the vocal cords, I mean, it's not something we study in depth in medical school, but there are muscles involved in that, obviously. And so those, just like we get muscle wasting as we get older, yes, there's muscle atrophy there. There can be some swelling in some situations of the vocal cords. And sometimes it's a deeper, lower pitch, hoarseness, raspiness, things like this. And that sometimes it's a gradual change. So, and even the hypothyroidism, which we were speaking about that earlier, can cause hoarseness and weakness as well. But when I was researching this, it talked about seeing an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor, just to make sure there's no pathology involved. Obviously, you want to make sure that those vocal cords are healthy, and then speech language pathologist to kind of work on exercises to help the voice, and then I know some patients are very fearful of hormone replacement therapy when that time comes. That's, obviously you don't want to, even though we're seeing now in the younger generations, hormonal changes and perimenopause younger than, let's say, 45. Some women are going through that change in their mid-30s. But hormone replacement is something to consider with a conscientious physician that will not just throw a bunch of hormone at you so you feel good, but do it in a way that, in a stepwise fashion that you're comfortable with, and that may help avoid those changes that can change the voice permanently.
This is really helpful, and I'm so grateful for your time. And I've learned a lot. I hope our listeners have as well. Is it possible for listeners to get in touch with you if they'd like to do so?
Oh, sure. Yes, I can share my information with you and my website. And yes, I'd be happy. And I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
Great. So we'll put those links in the show notes page. And thank you so much, Liz.
You're welcome, Dr. Jenny.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast with Dr. Jennifer Donaldson-Novitska. For more information about this episode, sacred music resources, or upcoming events, visit our website at sacredmusicpodcast.com. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you enjoy our podcast, please write us a review on iTunes. This improves our iTunes ranking and helps others find out about the podcast. The music you heard at the beginning of this episode is Hec Dies by William Byrd, sung by the London Oratory's Schola Cantorum Boys Choir, directed by Charles Cole from the CD Sacred Treasures of England. The music at the conclusion of this podcast is from the Prelude and Fugue in G Major, BWV 550 by Johann Sebastian Bach, performed by Jennifer Donaldson-Novitska. We look forward to having you join us next time, and until then, may we sing the praise of His glory.